Hello everyone and welcome to this podcast. My name is Bettool Jabur and joining me today are three amazing individuals. We have Sam Baker all the way from Bristol. Is it, Sam?
Yeah, Bristol. Yeah, thanks for having us on, Bettool.
No problem at all. Thank you. And Mladen, at the end of the day there, Mladen, but thank you very much for joining us all the way from Bulgaria. How are you doing today, Mladen?
Hello, everyone. Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining me on this podcast. And we have Joe all the way from Nicaragua. How are you doing? Early morning there, Joe?
Yeah, it's about 9:30 in the morning here. So, but it's great to join you all once again, the Three Musketeers.
The Three Musketeers, absolutely. I think you saved so many lives, to be honest, within the world of automation, which is what we're talking about today. We're talking about wasted time and automation. So wasted time within automation and everything that surrounds that. But first of all, just for our listeners, Joe, what do you think wasted time can be defined as?
I would define wasted time as something that takes longer than it needs to. And so I think in the traditional world, you have a lot of people who do things the traditional way that takes a set amount of time. But as we move forward into the future and have a lot of tools at our disposal for, let's say, automation and AI, those tasks can become more efficient. So wasted time becomes a lot less of a thing if you are educated and know how to approach those set of tools. And I think a lot of companies could learn and use these tools going forward to reduce their wasted time.
Mladen, would you agree with that? Do you have anything else to add to what Joe's just said there?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with what Joe just said. So wasted time is a big problem for every company. It causes sort of headache when we can't deliver projects on time. When the workflow is not efficient, people start getting frustrated, stressed about the projects, and then the creativity goes away. So for planning and minimizing the wasted time is a key priority for every company, I believe.
Absolutely, yeah. I would say so. But then when we look at wasted time, so we're saying that it's basically something that's pointless or something that is unproductive. Yeah. So Sam, how would you say then that within automation, we have wasted time? What is the big deal of having wasted time within automation?
I guess to kind of feed into what is wasted time, for me, I would say that wasted time is anything you're not seeing a gain or a benefit from, right? So, you could say that actually time spent doing something incorrect is not necessarily wasted time if you have learned from that to know how to progress it forwards in a better way. When we're talking about automation, I think there's definitely a risk of a lack of understanding of what it is that you're trying to achieve with the automation can kind of lead you down this rabbit hole of, I'll automate something to do this, but actually I need to automate something to do that. And you spend so much time kind of chasing the ideal of what automation is that actually you've wasted more time than if you just perhaps introduced a workflow that would achieve the same thing in much less time with much less kind of effort and involvement from likely, people with a higher kind of technical aptitude who might have time better spent doing more productive activities.
But do you think that organizations think, by the time we automate something, that is a wasted time? Might as well just do it manually, even though you're just doing that kind of automation process the once, and then later on you're reusing that, isn't it?
There's definitely kind of cases where people argue against the idea of producing tools or scripts or kind of automated processes to assist things. I know specifically the three of us in this call have encountered that scenario probably quite a few times when we were all working together. But I think, again, going back to what I was saying just then about the wasted time and anything that is a kind of a net gain or a net benefit, once you have automated something, okay, perhaps, there wasn't as much of a case for utilizing the automation as you originally thought, but, that, whatever it might have been that you automated, you have learned how to do that, you've learned the processes behind it. hopefully you know have a better understanding of the next thing that might be automated, to perhaps have the knowledge to go, do we need to automate this, or is this a workflow problem? Or perhaps, you know, the element of automation you've created could be repurposed for the next step.
Okay, so in terms of pros and cons then for automation, what would you say that, you know, is the pro for us moving forward with automating things within the industry? If I start maybe with yourself, Joe?
Sure. I think one of the pros is obviously quicker workflows. And as Sam just mentioned, and, you know, there's a balance between automation and doing it manually. And how far down the rabbit hole do you go with automation, you know, in the first place? But I think if companies are willing to learn and willing to actually train their employees in that automation, the results as a huge pro will be tenfold, in my opinion, in the medium to long term. The short term, yes, it might take a little bit of work and in actual fact, take probably more time than doing it traditionally. But if companies are willing to actually stick at it, they're huge positives and huge pros for doing that. So, yeah, that's one of the pros that I would say is stick at it, and the automation will effectively pay for itself.
Yeah. Do you have anything else to add to that, Mladen?
Well, I think people having the skills to use those new tools would greatly benefit every company in as Joe said, in medium to long term. So, yeah, I strongly believe that's the way forward, and people just need to get used to those new workflows and get used to learning on daily basis and just being curious about new processes of achieving, of working on projects.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. So, Sam, if we go into what Joe and Mladen have just said about, the pros of working with automation within the industry, do you have any kind of experience within the industry where I can see you all smiling now, you know what's coming. Do you have any experience where the wrong person was trusted with automation, or the wrong team?
Yeah, I mean, we're all kind of grinning here for a reason, right? As much as automation is this incredibly powerful thing that can make, arbitrary tasks complete in a very quick way, the kind of contrary of that can occur, which is someone who doesn't really know what they're doing with the tool or doesn't understand how they're using it properly can lead to, mass destruction in your in a Revit model, let's say, where someone is kind of tooling into lots of different bits of data at the same time, where an automation process might be aiding in the creation of sheets or overwriting parameter values. That same thing used in an incorrect way, as we've all experienced. Someone kind of pulls the trigger thinking that they're about to update their model and it's all going to be wonderful, and actually what they've done is overwritten, what has effectively taken weeks of work for someone to manually input data, right? So,
and you just want to cry.
You do, and then that's when the BIM guys, the Three Musketeers here, swoop in to kind of unravel that mistake, right? But it's automation is this hugely powerful tool. Put in the right hands, you're going to see huge gains in efficiency. But you just got to watch out for those, let's say, rogue elements who might not necessarily understand what they're doing, or mistakenly click the wrong button, and then they've kind of undone all of that work.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you say then, it's a bit like, if I come up with the analogy of, you give someone the keys to your Ferrari, but they haven't even, had a lesson in how to drive. Would you say it's a bit like that? You're giving someone exposure to something that can potentially cause more damage to the model or to themselves even, because this can cost jobs. And that's livelihood. And so it does affect the person at the end of the day. Would you say then there needs to be training. Then there's a missing element between some members of a team. So, for example, the Musketeers, you've got these great ideas, you've got this great mindset, you've got the capability to produce things. And then when you hand it over to someone, there needs to be some kind of implementation plan. There needs to be some kind of training. Does that happen often, or does it happen where, you get told, no, just pass it on, they'll learn it on the job, you're too busy, we need you on the next project, XYZ. So does that happen? Do you get to train people, or is it just, here you go?
I was going to say that we've all been through this, and I think in our past together, training was kind of a core fundamental of every user, every employee, every teammate that came into the company or companies that we've worked for, whether it be learning the basics of, let's say, Revit or CAD, all the way through to family design and even Dynamo with that kind of automation right there. And I think we also had to set out almost ground rules of saying, if you have passed this training, you can then access, let's say, the window family.
Oh, I like that. If you pass the training. So some people could potentially fail that training. Is that correct?
Some people needed more than one session or two sessions. So some people took it by storm and learnt. I remember when I started working with Sam, it was like, I told him once and he was already creating window families. I was like, wow, this guy's on it. And there are others that it just takes a little bit longer, and that's fine. They don't have an aptitude for it. But we did try and set out kind of guidelines of saying, hey, if this is what you can do right now, we don't want you to be scared of designing. We don't want to be scared of the model itself, but you have to understand that there are limits to your experience and knowledge. And until you pass that level, please don't go into the families and try and, work it out yourself right now, because in essence, I mean, that still happened. Regardless of whether us setting out guidelines, some people felt that they were able to do it, and obviously as a result, it kind of messed up a number of the, let's say, families that we were using, and ultimately that can delay the project, which then obviously Mr. and Mrs. Client are not happy with at the end of the day. So it became very apparent that the workforce, the employees, needed to kind of stick to that guideline. So I do believe training is the core part of education and learning correctly.
Absolutely. I mean, with great power comes great responsibility. With having such tools and being able to kind of utilize something that, if it's not used right, then you're going to break it. That kind of education session that everyone needs to know about is crucial. But you mentioned about the individuals that, would have gone in and played around with the families anyway before they finish or pass their training. How do you deal with something like that? How do you deal with, because that's wasting time now. We've tried to automate something. You're wasting both your time and their time, and they think maybe they're not going to waste your time. They'll just do it. They'll just get on with it. It'll look fine in the plans. But then later on, when you come to schedule and things, it's giving you the wrong dimensions, wrong feedback and things. How do you deal with something like that?
My take on something like that is actually exposure is hugely important for people to understand, what these things do.
Exposure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so previously, in line with what Joe was saying, where it's kind of, you have to have passed this training before you're allowed to interact with this thing, but you kind of have an awareness in our kind of role that, these things are always going on, regardless of whether you tell people they shouldn't be doing it or not. And there's definitely a side of kind of, let's say, self-improvement or self-education with looking into these things. But I do think there needs to be an element of ownership is also a really big thing.
Yeah.
So an exercise that I've been carrying out at the moment, that's taken me the better part of a year probably now, is overhauling the script library for Dynamo. And what we've effectively done is sectioned off different parts of the library to say, anybody can access this part of the library, only experienced users can access this. And then actually there's also a hidden kind of component that only the, let's say, administrative or the kind of specialist staff would even know existed.
That's amazing.
And
That's great.
The idea is, everybody can see this, everybody can use this, but also what's going on is within those Dynamo definitions, we have kind of a little node tucked away that's doing an analytics process, right? So every time someone runs one of these, somewhere in the backlog, a little file is getting updated, a database is getting updated to say who ran the file, who ran the definition, when they did it, which definition and on what project, right?
Yeah.
Because I think one thing that we've all experienced is, you go into troubleshoot for someone and you kind of get this, I don't know what happened, everything just disappeared, and you kind of go, okay, what were you doing when it happened then? Oh, I wasn't doing anything. Well, I suppose I did run that script that said delete all the elements, but I didn't. And you kind of go, right, well, so part of the let's say the exposure and ownership of this new library that I've been working on is that everybody has access to these tools, and what I'm hoping is that the right kind of people will start to have an appreciation of them and will start to utilize them. So we then have a massive productivity boost in the company, and the people who aren't using them correctly and they kind of don't have an excuse for, it sounds a bit harsh, but they don't have an excuse for negligence, right? If they've done something and they've created a problem and they're trying to hide the fact that they've created a problem, or they've kind of gone out of their way to access something they shouldn't have accessed, the ownership comes back to them, not the, again, we've all experienced this where it's kind of been, oh, such and such has happened in our project. Why have you allowed this to happen in our project, right? We're not infallible. We're not, overseeing of every single project and everything that goes on. There has to be an ownership on the individual. And really, when going back to your kind of with great power comes great responsibility. Well, you need to be responsible if you're going to be, have your hands on that kind of automation. So let's make people responsible.
Absolutely. So what's your take on it then, Mladen, on from what Sam said there, we've got a lot of people trying to utilize some tools and sometimes maybe utilizing it incorrectly, or maybe just saying what's happened to it, my model's disappeared, or whatever might have happened. What's your take on it, Mladen, then, in terms of your experience of that happening to you?
Oh, I believe, as Joe and Sam said, failure is inevitable. So it is not really wasted time if you do your best to learn from the mistakes that happened. If it keeps happening, of course, this is wasted time. But if we keep an eye on this lessons learned file, I think, with more, then people get more experienced and things move forward. So failure is really inevitable, and it's not wasted time as long as people take responsibility and try not to do that again in 2 weeks' time. As Sam said, separating the different tools to perform different tasks. There is with automation, there is I think one of the key aspects when it comes to automation is the proper planning and the implementation, trying not to over automate the tools and just being careful with what actually the tool does and the limitations. But that comes again to the more experienced people who implement those tools. So they need to be careful with what's allowed to the end user and what is not.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of looking at it from a user's perspective, so I'll be the naughty one in the room. I'll be the one who's doing this all wrong. Can I come up with the excuse of it's too complicated? I don't understand it. Do you ever get that? It's too complicated. It's meant to make things faster, but actually it's made things slower for me. Or do you ever get that as a BIM coordinator within practice?
Yes, we do get that on a daily basis. And I think there is the misunderstanding of the actual tools that are in place. we can always argue that people don't necessarily know the Revit API. It's all in the background, but you click a button and you expect something to happen. It's the very same thing with whether that being Dynamo or some plugin custom built for the company. You press a button and the tool will do its thing in the background. So people, if people are not willing to adapt to these new workflows, they will always find an excuse not to use them. So
that's brilliant. So no excuses.
No excuses.
No excuses. You have to use them. Okay, so we've kind of talked about maybe slightly common mistakes or common things that happen within a practice. Coming up next on Optimise et al. Do you think that is actually going to make you lazier, or do you think it is optimizing your time?
Right. It is funny actually, when we were talking about the Ferrari earlier, I kind of had this other analogy that popped into my head about, automation compared to cars, right? And if you think of a manual transmission car as your baseline Revit, once upon a time some clever blogs came up with, an automatic transition, and suddenly you didn't need to change gears manually, you didn't need to hold down the clutch pedal. All of this stuff started working a lot smoother. And I'll go back to my car analogy and just say, even if you don't have an understanding of what's going on under the hood, make sure you have an appreciation of what's going on under the hood.
So let's say a new business comes and approaches you and they would like to implement some automation within their practice. What would your key advice be for that business?
Understand the end goal. People with less technical aptitude tend to jump at the idea of automation or AI. It's kind of like wouldn't it be great if we could automate everything, and wouldn't we? But actually, if you don't know kind of what it is that you're trying to end up, what is the ideal that you're trying to achieve, you're just going to burn hours trying to achieve something.
If people want to really push forward automation and new processes, they need to be curious every single day and just keep an eye on what's available.
I'm going to quote Denzel Washington, one of my favorite quotes of all time, and I think it can be applied to every aspect of life, including business. And he says, this was back in 2017, he said, "Without commitment, you'll never start, but more importantly, without consistency, you'll never finish." And so if I was to give any advice to a company that was just starting this, I'd say, do you have commitment in going down this rabbit hole in order to develop? Because you don't just develop one bit of automation. Once you start, you develop and you continue developing.